Alright, so we got Grande 1 back on the ground. Let's see what we got to do on top. First thing is to start with the brakes. This is your ABS module. Now in the old days we used to remove all these lines, but let's not do that. We're not going to open up the brake system, or we're not going to open up the power steering. So what you're going to do is you're going to pull out this shoulder bolt. Now this is a funny looking bolt. It's a 6mm shoulder bolt. And then on the bottom of the brake booster, of the ABS module, you're going to see these pins. Hope you can see those. And they go right into those grommets. So you're going to pull this bolt out, then you're going to pop the module up and swing it over. It's going to stay with the engine. At the same time, you're going to pull the two nuts off the studs on the vacuum booster and pull your master out and pull that over with it. That's all going to go with the engine or stay with the chassis when we pull the body off. Now, a couple of notes on this master cylinder. One, that rod, when you reinstall the master cylinder, must be in the center of the plunger on the master. If it's not, you're not going to have any brakes. It looks like this master may have been leaking, so we're probably going to end up replacing it. Two is the master cylinder has an O-ring. Make sure that you replace that O-ring, preferably with a new one, or you're going to have a vacuum leak and your engine's going to run lean. Another note on the brakes is this connector. This is your ABS module connector. Now this rear cover can be a little tricky to get off. Basically this cover rotates or pivots up. You have to pinch these two tabs, pull it up. As you're pulling it up, just like a lever lock connector, it will slide out of the module. And of course that stays on the body, so just leave it there. Now on this Jeep PCM, you're going to be sending this to us. This is an automatic Jeep PCM. You can tell because it has 4 connectors and they all have pins in them. If this was a manual transmission PCM, this C4 connector would not have any pins in it. This is C1, 2, 3, 4. This C4 connector controls your Prindle, shift solenoids, vehicle speed, all the transmission functions. This white connector, or your C3 connector, stays with the body. This is the body connector. This does air conditioning, brake pedal, and some other functions into the PCM. So do not remove this harness. I've had guys do that, but just leave it alone. Now, the other 3 connectors are your C100 harness. So you're going to unplug these 3 connectors. You're going to unplug your air compressor, air conditioning pressure sensor or transducer, and your alternator. Now these are going to go back exactly the same way they come off. And let me say something. This C100 harness right now, we're modifying it and sending it back to you so it's plug and play. Hopefully within the next year this C100 harness will be eliminated and you will not have to send it to us for modification. But for now this is how we're doing it and it works fine. So you're going to basically put this C100 harness back in exactly the way it came off. So try to keep these clips in good shape. Notice that it comes around the back of the brake booster here. Now, right here, it breaks off into the C102 connector. Now this C102 connector is the engine connector. So this connector goes down to the injectors, EGR valve, coils, etc. Go ahead and disconnect that. This will stay with the engine. Now this is a break off from the C100 that goes to the body for your instrument cluster and other functions. So go ahead and disconnect that, leave that part loose, and this part is tapped into the body. You can go ahead and leave that there. Now it's a little tight because this vehicle has a supercharger. Normally we would take the heater hoses off. You'll notice that when the LS3 is in here, we're going to have a lot more room. The LS3 is probably only going to come up to about the bottom of this heat exchanger. So we'll be able to run new heater hoses. Now I suggest you just take those off and run new ones when the body's off. We'll probably cut these to get the body off because they're so difficult to get to. You can pull your radiator and shroud off, your electric fan off, if you are getting the upgraded radiator. If you're not getting the upgraded radiator, you can just leave it in place. When you pull the body off, it'll stay with the body. And when you put it back on, you'll have less work to do. I prefer to pull the radiator off once the body's off. You have more room. So that's optional, just depending on whether you got the heavy-duty radiator or not. Now you'll notice we did disconnect the upper radiator hose, the lower radiator hose, and the tranny cooler lines. And I wanted to make a note on those tranny cooler lines. They're very difficult to get to. They're at the bottom of the radiator and they require a release tool. Just go ahead and cut them unless you're going to reuse them, because we don't use the factory tranny cooler. It's pretty pathetic. This is actually it. It's at the bottom of the condenser behind the bumper, so it gets no cooling, or very little cooling, and it's just not worth running. In fact, this condenser is probably plugged up to the point we're just going to put a manual transmission condenser in it, because the manual transmission condenser stops about here, so that's extra airflow for you, and they only cost about $100, so you might as well upgrade to a manual transmission condenser if your condenser is plugged. So let's walk over to the other side. This is your C, and I hope you can see it with the lighting. This is your C300 connector. You notice that it stays on the body, and then the mating connector is down here. So this is going to stay with the chassis. This is going to stay on the body. This is your main connection between the body and the chassis. Disconnect that. Now, this Jeep has had a lot of mods done to the battery and the battery tray. We're probably just going to replace it. This battery has been turned sideways. It has a custom battery box for clearance to the supercharger. They've cut it up so that this is your TIPM, or your gateway module. This is not just a fuse block. There's a computer down in here that if something goes wrong with that, you potentially could stop. We don't want heat or anything interfering with this TIPM. You're going to notice with the LS3 that this is all going to be open space, and we want to maintain the factory shielding between this TIPM and the engine. So we'll probably just go ahead and replace this battery box on this vehicle. And then of course we're going to clean a lot of this wiring up. Normally this connector would be down between the battery and the TIPM, and you're just going to leave it there. It would not be exposed like this. They moved it up so they could turn the battery sideways. And we find that cleaning up aftermarket wiring is a big part of our swaps. If you look over here, this one's quite a nightmare. This was a swap that was done by another shop, and the wiring is just completely ridiculous. So we're reworking it, and believe me, it's a lot easier to do it right the first time. And you'll see as we progress in our swap how we try to keep the wiring simple and clean for the best reliability and looks. This is your purge valve connector. Go ahead and save that. Don't do anything with this. Just leave this alone where it's at. Your purge valve normally would be over here, but with the supercharger it's been removed. We'll show you this factory setup when we restore it. Power steering, you're going to leave the pump connected to the lines. It's going to go basically right back where it is. So after we get we're going to get the body off, then we'll strip these accessories off, and you're just going to take this pump and pull it over. The reservoir leave the reservoir alone. It's going to stay in place. We're not going to relocate it. Again, the power steering system does not have to be opened. So that's about it. You're going to disconnect your battery, of course. That's going to be the first thing you do. I will say, if you have any mods done to your engine, you have a ProCal and you've recalibrated the speedometer gear ratio, you have an Intune, Hypertech, Super Chip, CMR, whatever you have, unlock it from your PCM, put your PCM back to stock. There's no reason to waste money on a tuner that's locked to your PCM if you're not going to be using those functions. So unlock it from your VIN and sell it with a supercharger, or sell your programmer even without a supercharger. And we can supply you with a ProCal or other less costly devices to program the tire size and reset your speedometer. Do not remove your bumper, winch, rock rails. Now I will say this about the rock rails. If your rock rails come up and wrap onto the body and are bolted on with riv nuts or whatever, then yes, they do have to come off. If they're two-piece like this, you're okay. They're just going to stay on the body. That's pretty much it. We'll be removing the body on this one here shortly, and maybe I can take a quick vid of the body coming off, and that will hopefully happen later this week. And until then, have a good New Year.